Good day. This is DeTracey, and welcome to episode number 20 of My Messy House, because MS is raw and real. So today, in the messy house world, let's just say you're coming in here for the first time to watch this episode. My Messy House is about the messiness up here. Messiness that we as human beings experience that can get magnified when you live with MS, fatigue, and all the other things that come along with symptoms and challenges that come along with living with MS, or in fact any autoimmune disease that can arise. Life isn't easy for a lot of people, and this is something I want to actually bring up today. I know in the early days when I was diagnosed, I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. I was feeling, there was a time when early on I was reading a copy of a weekly magazine in Vancouver, where I lived at that time, called the Georgia Straight, and there was an article about a woman who lived with Parkinson's. And, she was in her 30s, so young, had a kid, and was, of course, devastated. And she had a fantasy about having cancer and dying. And I started to have that fantasy too. I thought, I really, honestly, I felt like I was dying. I knew it wasn't real. Like, I knew it was in my mind. But in a sense, there was a death happening because I was grieving this new life, these changes. I had just come off of 3 days of steroid drip after coming out of in the hospital. And, I felt crazy. And, it was a very difficult time for me. And, I guess, what I'm reflecting on here, because when we look at messiness around a life situation and things that can happen, it can be difficult to find the way out, the way out of that. For me, I was in that place of incredible fear. And fear of never being able to walk again, even though I was mobile. Things that didn't even make sense rationally. I didn't want to talk to anybody that lived with MS. I didn't want to read about MS. I didn't want to go to a support group about MS because I was afraid that I would attract that into my life. That's how scared I was, And it took me a while to come to a place of realizing that it was in my head, that those fears were not actually real because they weren't actually happening to me. And that's an interesting thing to explore, is what thoughts are true. There is a woman, Byron Katie, she's written lots of books about asking oneself the question of when we have a thought about something. So if I were to believe that when I think about multiple sclerosis, that therefore I will become completely disabled and maybe never be able to walk again, which I know is true for some people. It happens. But there I was at the beginning of my journey, and I asked myself, well, is this true? And the answer is, well, no, it's not happening now. So therefore it's not true. And even if I said, yes, it's true, then I'd say, well, the Katie Byron process is to say, well, how, if I'm thinking that thought, how is my life, right? How is my life? Well, I feel stressed when I think that thought. I'm scared. I don't want to get out of bed. I'm angry. I'm limited to my capacity of what I can do. So when you kind of ask yourself that question and you dive into that, and then you ask yourself the question of, the question I asked myself is, well, in the absence of that thought, what's happening? Well, in the absence of that fear around losing my mobility in that very moment, there's room for other thoughts like, what am I going to make for dinner? Or, boy, this food tastes good. Or, I'm really enjoying learning about this book on how to think about things written by Byron Katie, And so in the absence of that thought is something totally different, an alternative reality. And so I think it's a very useful technique. And, I can't say I'm actively using it now. However, as I reflect back on it, at that time in my life when I was reading these Byron Katie books, and that is a woman who actually, her story is that she had gone crazy. And they didn't know what to do with her family, her husband and her kids. She ended up being put in a house and just locked in there. And she had this epiphany, or I don't know, it could have been a divine download that changed her perspective on life and how she viewed it, taking her away from that place of feeling as a victim to a liberated individual who could question her thoughts and determine what was true and actually turn around the thought to take responsibility for them. It's kind of complicated. I want to get into the whole thing around it because I think the key point is breaking this down into little pieces so that we can assimilate the information easily, which is asking ourselves, is this true? And then if we say yes, asking yourself again, is this really true? Well, no, it's not true. I'm not, in that moment, I had my mobility. So, and fortunately I still do. And that's not the case for everyone. I know a lot of people living with MS need walking aids and wheelchairs, and need help with getting around. So we're all in a different spectrum around MS. This process is a very powerful process. So I'll leave you with that as the little gem for today. I'm Jen DeTracey. This is My Messy House because MS is raw and real, and I'll see you again soon.